I was in the kitchen in our house giving my daughter dinner the other night, listening to Marketplace on NPR, and I heard the esteemed Pete Peterson, former Nixon Commerce Secretary, also the big money billionaire behind a lot of the different outlets and organizations in Washington, D.C. that have been pushing for, deficit worry.
Hair on Fire Brigade.
The Hair on Fire Brigade. And what was remarkable, he's play this bit of tape. This is him on Marketplace, basically enunciating that he's with the president. I mean, he doesn't say that, but what he said, the content of what he said, is what Barack Obama's offering. Take a listen.
A program like Simpson Bowles that had about $3 of spending cuts for every dollar of revenue, and one that attacks all of the aspects of the budget in which everything is on the table. And by everything, I mean entitlements, I mean tax reform, I mean defense, are all on the table, is the right way to approach this problem. I would be much happier with a program that was focused on the long term, and as I say, had some investment in the short term.
I mean, that is basically Barack Obama's position. And what I find so ironic here is that the only person in Washington who genuinely, I think, wants a grand bargain along those contours is Barack Obama, and with also Gene Sperling, the menacing bully that famously threatened Bob Woodward, right? Though they genuinely want it. They believe in it. They've been very clear about it. I don't think they're playing politics when they say it. And the irony is that the same beltway chattering classes that are obsessed with this are most angry at Barack Obama for not getting it done, even though he's the only person that actually wants it.
But it's because the politics of Washington are no longer about deal-making. I mean, when I worked in the Congress 10 years ago, there was a closing window of an ability to make any kinds of deals. We talked on your show a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months ago, about how Barack Obama himself has become essentially the culture war. Anything that he does is what the Republicans have to be against, because you just say his name, and among the Republican base, it fires that base up. So when those Republicans go back to their districts, in gerrymandered districts where they have to worry about mostly a primary as opposed to facing a Democratic opponent, then whatever Barack Obama is proposing, even if it's Social Security cuts, that no, we can't, because I don't want to face a Republican opponent.
I mean, look, first of all, if anyone has any doubt of whether what you say is true, remember back to the campaign when Mitt Romney basically made a two-part argument about entitlements. The president refuses to tackle entitlements, and he wants to cut your Medicare. So, enough said about that. Look, I think where the problem comes is that the president recognizes that there are, and Stephanie and I think disagree on this, but there are long-run pressures, particularly on health care spending. That, by the way, is a larger problem in the private sector than the public, but it is an economic constraint in the future. And so the president, who's a very intelligent guy and recognizes inefficiencies and those kinds of constraints down the road, wants to do something about it. But when you bring that into this context, it immediately turns into slash and burn and cut social insurance in ways that are unacceptable to me, and I believe to most of the American people.
But you guys don't want, when I say you guys, Americans for Tax Reform and sort of the constituency you represent, like, I don't think you're interested in a grand bargain, right? Do you want to cut spending and you want to keep taxes low, right? That's what you want.
I mean, that's the thing. If you're saying that, the Republican position is just anti-Obama, for our part, it's hard to know what anti-Obama is. I mean, look at his State of the Union address. He takes credit for all the cuts in the BCA. In the same breath, talks about turning off the sequester. He talks about complexity in the tax code and getting rid of loopholes. In the same breath, he talks about new credits, new tax treatment for energy companies that he likes, not the energy companies he doesn't like. So it's very difficult to talk about this in a consistent manner if that's all your agenda is. But you're right, it's a smaller government.
But let me challenge the premise for a second. Your premise that Barack Obama wants a grand bargain. If Barack Obama wanted a grand bargain, and I think he does, then perhaps he's a poor negotiator. In other words, if we're in a Washington where a Republican doesn't want to look like they're making a deal with Barack Obama, then if Barack Obama ultimately wants a grand bargain in this middle, then he would take a position is far to the progressive left with the bully pulpit, so that then Republicans could politically show that they forced him to a middle. And that's not what he's done.
That's interesting.
Well, the thing is, too, if you've got, say you've got a progressive agenda if you're Barack Obama, the thing that's really interesting to me is that we even came to the fiscal cliff, right? If Democrats were so committed to having the Bush tax cuts expire for the top income earners, they had 2 years where Nancy Pelosi was in control, Harry Reid was in control, and Barack Obama was in the White House. If for 2 years, they woke up and didn't do anything about it. So it's very interesting to hear that he wants a grand bargain. He wants all of his priorities.
Well, there are other priorities, though,
sure,
right?
but I mean, like, this,
But Mattie's correct. Mattie's correct in the following sense. There were not that many Democrats who wanted to see the Bush tax cuts fully sunset, and that includes Barack Obama. I mean,
no, right.
I mean,
but I think the point Mattie's making here, which I think is I agree with a slightly different version of it, is basically that there was when the Democrats were controlling, to the extent they ever controlled the three branches with the filibuster, which was not that long, but when they did have a majority in the Senate and a majority in the House and the White House, right? The agenda was on domestic legislation that would be kind of long-term statutory changes to the fabric of the U.S. Code, right? So that's healthcare reform, Dodd-Frank. There was, of course, the first thing they did was the Recovery Act, right, which is short-term kind of counter-cyclical fiscal policy. When the Tea Party swept into power, everything changed to the budget, right? So we went from talking about, like, and it's actually very different than Newt Gingrich in 1994, right? The Contract with America had a bunch of domestic policy priorities, like, for instance, welfare reform, that they worked to achieve. This Republican caucus doesn't seem to have any priorities in terms of domestic policy legislation other than the budget.
Why didn't Democratic leaders step up in 2010 and say the Tea Party is wrong? I mean, that's the thing that I've never been able to wrap my head around, the acceptance of deficit reduction overall.
Because it's been partially a Democratic position. I mean, that's the issue. I mean, I've worked on campaigns in my previous life before I was a journalist, and on campaigns, Democrats in red states, Democrats in blue states would always basically, the calculus, the unspoken calculus was, as long as I say I'm against the deficit, then everything else I can be for, and it looks like I'm in the...
There is no counter-narrative on the progressive side on this. It is absolutely...
Except in Kansas City.
Paul Krugman a couple of times a week.
Yeah, a couple of, no, but he is extremely strong on the anti-austerity stuff.
Right.
But he hasn't come out and said, in the long run, I'm not concerned about the deficit. I just fundamentally reject the premise that the deficit is a problem in the long run. Almost no one will say that. And that does so much damage.
Yeah, that's what sets the center.
Agenda. To any agenda that you could possibly promote for good economic policy in the short term.
Jared wrote a blog post yesterday saying he solved the sequester. We're going to dig into whether he has or not after this break.